Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, and from everywhere people are joining us. I know we have a few people coming in from Barcelona, Spain. We have people joining in from the West Coast, so that's really wonderful, and that definitely shows how important having this conversation is at this particular time. So welcome to Women in Data Philadelphia's event, where we'll be discussing the job search during this pandemic. My name is Rajbi Mehta, and I am the co-chapter lead here in Philly, along with Lucia Wang, who will be leading our conversation today. Before we get started, I wanted to take a minute and talk about Women in Data. So, Women in Data is a global nonprofit that is present in 24 cities all over the world. Our mission is to increase diversity and encourage inclusion in the field of data and tech. And we are trying to achieve our mission by providing workshops, conferences, symposiums, and free virtual webinars. So if you're interested in joining our global community, and it's a great opportunity to connect and learn from like-minded individuals, you can join our Slack channel. I have added the link to our Slack channel in the chat box below. And I have, so if you're based in a specific city where there is a Women in Data chapter that is already present, you can join that specific chapter as a member. And if your city does not have a chapter, you can go to our website and sign up for an application form. There are a list of cities on our website as well, and you can see based on your location which one is more convenient for you. So currently, because all of us are working from home and socially distancing, we are hosting weekly webinar series on our YouTube channel, and we have speakers coming in from all over the world. You can watch them on our YouTube channel, which is also called as Women in Data.org, and feel free to subscribe to our channel so that you get those weekly notifications every time we share or upload a new video. The fun thing is that we are starting a book club this month. The book of this month is Weapons of Mass Destruction. It basically talks about how data literacy and has changed over the years and how it can be beneficial for just to be much more literate in terms of data. The link to the book club Slack channel is also on in the chat box below, so feel free to join that specific link as well. Lastly, I just want to talk a bit about the logistics side. I would recommend everyone in the audience, if you aren't speaking, please mute yourself and just close your share video option. If you have questions to our speakers, use the chat box. I will make sure that the speakers are aware of those questions as well. Lastly, last but not the least, I just want to say that I know the world is going through some really rough times in the past few months, and every morning we are waking up to some horrible news that's happening somewhere in the world. There is more division amongst all of us rather than unity, and that's where we realize that, and we are trying our best to promote equality and equal opportunity for every human being. So if our organization is able to help you and achieve your goals, even in the smallest way possible, we'll consider ourselves successful. And I cannot stress this enough, but education and empathy go hand in hand. And we want to provide you that opportunity. We want to provide you the education, but we are also empathizing with the current situation as well. So I will stop talking now, and I will just say that thank you for being here. Thank you to our speakers for taking out time on a Saturday morning to help us achieve our mission. And I'll hand over the control to Lucia Wang, who can start the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rajvi. Hey, everyone. Like Rajvi mentioned, I'm going to be hosting or really just facilitating this conversation. It's really a dialogue between you, the audience, and the speakers to make sure that you are getting the information that you're searching for during these times. So to quickly introduce myself, I am a senior marketing data analyst, as well as the co-host of the Philadelphia chapter of Women in Data, along with Rajvi. And I am incredibly grateful that Emily and Brian, who I'm going to introduce themselves shortly, are able to join us today, make themselves available to our community. Like I mentioned, we're going to be taking live questions from the audience throughout, so send them my way. And before we get started, I'm just going to ask that the speakers briefly introduce themselves. So can we start with Emily?
Sure. Thanks for the brief intro, Lucia. To everyone else, thanks for joining. It's really great to meet you all virtually. My name is Emily Meekins. I am a people operations lead at Seer Interactive. I've worked in the agency space for a few years now, and prior to that, I was at a recruiting agency. So ad agency now, recruiting agency previously. But at Seer Interactive, we are a 200-person digital marketing agency, well, I guess about 180, headquartered in Philly. We have another office in San Diego, and we have a small but growing remote team that is stretched across the US, except now we are all remote. Here at Seer, we focus primarily in search, so SEO, PPC, and analytics. And with all of that, data is underpinning all of that. We leverage big data to make smarter decisions in search marketing. So that is the focus of Seer. In terms of my experience, I have a breadth of recruiting experience in digital marketing, analytics, data engineering, data analytics, project management, account management, design, development. I also, in my recruiting agency days, focused a lot in finance, tax, accounting. So I've seen recruiting in a lot of different areas within an organization, but also within a number of different organizations as well. So hopefully some of the information that I have to share today will be helpful to you all as you're navigating your search, especially during COVID-19.
Thank you, and thanks, Lucia, for letting us and inviting us to talk here to everybody today. Really appreciate it. My name's Brian Uff. I've been a recruiter for about 15 years now, and I worked in a number of different spaces and currently work at Vanguard and have been at Vanguard for about 4 years now. And my position at Vanguard, I specifically am in charge of recruiting in the data and analytics space. So it's pretty much exclusive. I started at Vanguard about three and a half years ago. And that is when they started to really build out the analytics function in many different parts of the enterprise. And currently Vanguard is about, I would say probably about 18,000 at Vanguard today. And the data and analytics community across the board is probably about close to 1,500, give or take. And that's including all of the, major, all the different job backgrounds, et cetera, across the enterprise. And I am very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you both. So I'm going to start us off just by setting some call it context, really, just getting a sense for how each of your companies are viewing analytics and really the job roles that fall under analytics. Brian, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that Vanguard today, they would probably say that, we are a few years behind in starting in the data and analytics space. I think we're probably about 6-7 years in now, strong recruiting into this space. But the way that it's set up, it's a hub and spoke model. So we have many different business units across our enterprise. And the main space for data and analytics is what we call our CAI division. It's our Center of Analytics and Insights group. And that specific group is the main hub. And, they would call it the Center of Excellence. It's our, most technical level of data science, machine learning engineers, et cetera, and soon to be some, AI research, et cetera, as well into this, that sit in this particular group. And then that group spokes out into many different parts of the business, not all of them, and we have pockets of analytics in all of these different parts of the business as well. So we currently have about 16 to 17 different business units, and CAI has had its hand in non-retail and retail across the enterprise, and helping solving the challenging problems that those parts of the business didn't have the head count at that time. But as we grow in the data and analytics space, each one of these groups are definitely growing within the data and analytics space as well. So just for example, we have a client experience group that I would say a lot of that talent in that group has grown significantly and is as strong as CAI. We have our investment management group, which are, they're kind of out on their own island. They're doing all the investment. They're on the trade floor. There's a lot of fintech type of background, quant type background, data science, that type of background in that space, in that group. And then we also have our enterprise advice pillar that has gone up about 2 years ago, which is very strong as well in data science and their data and analytics. And then we have several other groups too that have, pockets of data and analytics, our investment group as well, IIG. So these, as you can imagine, as a company the size of Vanguard grows, we are building each one of these divisions up, and hopefully we'll all be within the same type of skill sets as our center of excellence as well. So that's kind of how it's set up today.
Awesome, thank you. Emily, can you talk a little bit about how analytics is organized at your company and what the different career paths are?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot smaller than Vanguard. Again, we're a team of about 180. We started in SEO. Our founder, Will Reynolds, is a leader in SEO. He really kind of started Seer focused in that. We quickly grew into PPC, or pay-per-click advertising, and then web analytics as well. So those are our three primary divisions, but data really underpins every single one of them. So if we're focusing on web analytics, we're really thinking about leveraging Google Analytics and Adobe Analytics to understand, okay, when a user lands on my website, where did they come from? What do they look like? What are they doing when they get there? What are the pages that they're clicking through? What are the pages that they bounce off of? And really using all of this website analytics to understand our audience and how we can better serve them. When we think about PPC, or pay-per-click, those are those sponsored ads that you might see when you Google search something. And they were a lot more prevalent even 1, 2, 3 years ago. You could kind of see what was an advertisement and what wasn't. And these days, not so much, but we're really looking at who clicks through on those ads and how can we better reach an audience that actually wants the advertisement that they're clicking on. So when we pay for that click, we're paying for someone that is hopefully going to convert and buy a product. And PPC has grown really sophisticated. Folks there are doing a lot of work in machine learning, AI, automation, people learning SQL and Python and developing really complex queries in Excel. That team also does a ton of work with big data and leveraging our data warehouse to look at really large sets of data, mashing paid data and organic data together to understand how are these data sets interacting, and again, really leveraging data to better understand our audience. Then we have our SEO division, and there too, again, working with really large data sets to understand audience, and we can leverage both Google search query data, but also third-party data sets like Reddit and Forbes and the census, so all sorts of publicly available data that we can use to, again, better understand who is that person behind the search and how can we better reach them in our advertising efforts. So that's how data really plays out across those three divisions. We also have a data strategy team that is working a lot closer to that data warehouse and using tools like Power BI to create pretty sophisticated dashboard templates that we can scale across clients. We have a data engineering team that is really much more rooted in that data warehouse. So they do a lot of work in GCP or Google Cloud Platform. And then we have data just all across the organization. Like, we hire data nerds and want people who are excited about data to work at Seer. So even within our People Ops division, which is where I sit, we do a ton of work with looking at performance data against compensation data to make sure that we're really equitable in how we're looking at those two pieces together. We work with our data a lot in looking at like praise data to understand trends there and see where there might be gaps in engagement or how we can better support our team. We do a lot of work with recruiting data and understanding, okay, what do our recruiting funnels look like and where might we see gaps, or where might we be able to tighten up a piece of the puzzle. So there's a lot happening in the People Ops team. Our finance team does a lot when you're in an agency. We're looking at revenue per head count and bandwidth and client hours. So they do a lot with our data there and connecting that to finance, as well as our business strategy team when working with new clients and outbound sales and inbound sales. So really data sits at the heart of who we are as an agency, and it's only becoming more prevalent and important as the amount of data grows and the strategies that we're exploring become a bit more sophisticated.
Awesome. Thank you guys both. That question really came from just as I've been in the data and analytics space, seeing how differently both different organizations view, like how the analytics set up at their company also view different types of data roles. So like a data analyst, I'm sure as a lot of you on the webinar have noticed, can range anywhere from being in an Excel, creating boards, to building models and optimization models. So yeah, just wanted to set some context in terms of, or give everyone a sense for how these two companies are looking at it. I'm really going to dive into like the heart of this webinar at this point, which is just starting off with a question of, you know, different approaches that you guys might recommend someone who's been recently laid off and is in the midst of job hunting. Yeah, during these times. So if you want to start off, and then we can just sort of have an open conversation about it.
Yeah, I can start. I think, you know, number one, the biggest thing is obviously, you know, during these times, staying positive and just knowing that you're not alone in this space. You have, you know, the entire world is going through this. So that's number one. And I think, you know, number two is really trying to prioritize your basic human needs next. So if you've been laid off, or if you are a newly grad, just making sure, you know, that you're taking your basic human needs into account before you're out there trying to find that next career. And I think that, you know, once you do those two things, then it's a good time to kind of get started on finding, you know, your next opportunity. So I would say that just having some direction, a target. It's easy to go out and apply to anything when you're in this type of situation, feeling desperate. I strongly advise against doing that. I think that if you have a target and a few target companies, aim for quality instead of quantity, and just make sure that, you know, obviously you have those few targets and start there. For students and full-time workers that take time, I think this is the time to take the time to spruce up your resume. Go out and showcase, make sure that you're showcasing your transferable skills, networking. If I could, stand on a rooftop with a megaphone, I think that's the biggest and most important thing is networking. So I think I would just continue to network, build up relationships with the companies and those targets that you're trying to, work at. And, you can even set up and go as far as setting up Google alerts for the companies that you're looking at. If anybody's familiar with Google alerts, it's a great tool to really, obviously keep tabs on, jobs and companies and news with those specific companies, et cetera. So again, I just tell candidates pretty much day in and day out, just remember that you're not alone. A lot of companies right now, they might not be hiring right now because they're trying to adapt to, this virtual environment. Right now we say at Vanguard, we're business as usual. We're trying to hire as normal as possible, but it's more like business as possible. So I think that that's really, my message is just to stay positive, have some direction, and make sure that you're building that network.
Yeah, I'm happy to hop in and give my point of view as well. I think Brian really hit it on the head in terms of quality over quantity is a big one, networking and staying positive. I remember my job search before I joined Seer, and we were in a pandemic, and it's tough to apply places and not hear back and feel like your application is going into a black hole and then being like, I'm going to wake up the next day and do it all over again. It's hard and it's tough now when not a lot of people are hiring and there is a lot of competition. So again, reminding yourself that you're not alone, staying positive. I think too, expanding on the quality over quantity, that's a really great way to step away from just chugging out applications, which can just be mind numbing and not super exciting and can feel like you're not getting traction. I read an article the other day that recommended try to have 2 meaningful conversations each day. And that sounds maybe a little aggressive, maybe 2 meaningful conversations on Tuesday and Thursday to get started or something. But that is a really great way to build your network. And people want to help, especially right now. People really want to help. They understand it's a hard time for everyone. There's lots of recruiters that are putting themselves out there and saying hey, I understand this is hard. If you need advice on your job search, on your resume, want to mock interview with someone, hit me up. So keep an eye out on LinkedIn. There are lots of calls where people are sharing their time in that way. I know at Seer, we set up a program when this all started in mid-March, where our recruiters are open calendar to the community. You can book time with our team for a career consult to get advice on any of the things I just mentioned. So it's a 30-minute slot. It's an event page on our site, and we're not going to have all the answers. But again, just having that meaningful conversation and getting another point of view, showing up to things like this, where you're able to chat with people who, again, just give another perspective. It can freshen things up, even if it's not hey, this is going to get me one step closer into the company of my dreams. Maybe not directly, but leveraging some of those skills in a new way might. And then there was something else I was going to say. I think I've said enough. I think that's good. There will probably be more questions.
Yeah, we're going to see questions come through. So I'm going to kind of go out of order here, but I'll make sure I'll do my get to all of them or somehow consolidate some common themes that I'm seeing. I like this one just where we are right now in the conversation. So what's a good way to set yourself apart from the competition? And I'm just going to add to that, what are different channels that you guys would suggest? I'm personally on LinkedIn and Glassdoor. Those are my 2 top channels, but maybe there's more specific ones in the analytics space that you guys might recommend that I'm not aware of?
Yeah, I'll hop in on this one real quick and then bounce it to Brian, because this is exactly where I wanted to go and then I couldn't remember. But I think this speaks really well to that quality over quantity in setting yourself apart. Brian mentioned, hey, if you can find like those 5 companies that you're interested in and really focus on those companies specifically, in doing that, like you look and sound a lot different than a lot of the people who are just like, I need to work anywhere. So how do you do that, right? Like, how do you do that in an application? And I think, again, it comes back to one, networking and seeing if you can connect with someone else in the organization potentially to have a conversation and make that face-to-face connection rather than just being an application. 2, that could mean like being a bit more personalized in your approach when it comes to your cover letter, your resume, getting a bit more creative. We've had people at Seer, again, we're a digital marketing agency and we do a lot in like search marketing. So we had someone who applied to a job that I forget, I don't know if they added it in their resume or their resume may have been a bit more of a creative resume, but they basically said like, go to Google search and search why X person should work at Seer. And they made their portfolio show up as like the top search, and their portfolio was like totally focused around their experience and how it's a great fit for Seer and why we should consider chatting with them. And that was like so on brand and so unique and like nothing we'd ever seen before. We had to talk to him. Like it didn't even really matter what his resume or cover letter or anything else looked like at that point. So I think if you can find unique ways, and one that starts with understanding that company. Like he did a lot of research on Seer. He knew like what we'd be looking for, what that brand voice was, what we were excited about as an organization, and then tailored his approach to that. So that again is very unique. You don't have to, I think there's certainly some middle ground between that and like blindly applying to roles, but also making connections with people. If you can identify someone within an organization that maybe looks like you, maybe they're a career changer as well, and they had a unique career path to where they are, people want to lift each other up. So if you're able to find someone, you're like, okay, I worked in event planning previously, and then I did this boot camp, and now I'm really trying to break into the analytics space. Is there someone in that organization that has a similar path? And maybe it wasn't event planning, maybe it was finance, and they made this interesting switch. Being able to reach out to that person and say, hey, I noticed you started in finance and you have this interesting path into analytics, switch to, and I'd love to hear your perspective on what that looked like. What were some tools that you used? Like, how did you break into the industry? People love that. Like, they want to help people that when they can think like, oh, this person was in my shoes 2 years ago. I remember how hard that was. So don't be nervous to reach out. I know that can be kind of scary. It feels a lot more comfortable just to apply. But if you can think outside of the box a little bit and try some new things, those one-to-one connections are really meaningful.
I really like that last point you made, Emily. Look for those who are trying to get into the industry or trying to make a switch in the industry, look for someone who had a similar career path. So I actually made a switch from investment analysis to now marketing analysis, and my boss actually also made a similar switch at some point in his career, and so there was definitely this like mutual understanding of what that looked like, and that is why I am where I am today. Brian, do you have anything to add to that? And then actually, I'm gonna bring in some of the things I'm getting from the audience, which is like
absolutely.
how should you think about messaging recruiters?
Right.
Whether it's to get them to review your resume or give feedback, just how do you stand out during a time like this where they are getting possibly a lot of volume?
No, absolutely. No, great question. I don't have much to add on the last one. I'll just say that, obviously it goes back to networking. I think Emily really, hit the nail on the head with her response there. I think as far as, the channels that we're all used to, like LinkedIn and, obviously in the data and analytics space, there's many different websites, et cetera. I would say, like, I love that creative approach, and that one, especially in a marketing agency, is phenomenal. So if you can think of anything creative to get someone's attention, I think the one thing I would add to just that question is, and this is just, say like LinkedIn, or if we're going to write a blog or something, connect with your network first, at these target companies that you want to work at, and then post like a blog or something that's interesting, that is basically highlighting your skill sets on your LinkedIn or any of these channels in the data and analytics space. So, whether it's, a project or a competition that you did, a Kaggle, or something that, really just want to highlight on LinkedIn, you can write a blog, and then you're connected with all these people already, and they can, review that. And I think that's a really good way to kind of stand out too from the rest of the folks. And another thing I'll add is, maybe you had a promising interview before all this happened. Just keep working that network. If you had a thoughtful conversation with a hiring manager before all this happened, and then it kind of went, silent because, obviously everybody has to adapt now to this situation, maybe a thoughtful email to that hiring manager or that recruiter, would go a long way. And I think it's a good opportunity to show them too what type of employee you could be. Obviously understanding the situation, and just having, some empathy around it as well. Even when you're looking for a job, goes a long way. So, and then to your second question, can you repeat it? I'm sorry. It's more less standing out from a resume.
No worries. Yeah, just like, how do you message a recruiter to catch their eye to actually hear back when they're getting so much volume right now?
Right. Yeah. No, it's a great question. Working at a bigger company like Vanguard, I definitely get a high volume of messages. I think, again, just being thoughtful, explaining, hey, my name is, and this is what I'm looking for. And I saw, I would even say, like, I saw like a particular job. I think it's harder when it's left open-ended, like, hey, I'm really trying to get into Vanguard, and can you help me? I think if you come with, hey, I actually saw this job, and here's my resume. Do you think I'd be a great fit for this job? Can you give me some, input and recommendations on how to move to that next level? I think that really helps. I think to stand out, like, one thing that I would do, especially during this time, if you have time, would be to spruce up your resume and really, start looking at those job descriptions. I know candidates that I've spoken with in the past, and ones that usually, move forward, are ones that they have probably multiple different resumes that were based on job descriptions of that particular company they were trying to get into. So they would read that job description, see certain things in there, and say, oh, I have these skills, and maybe I need to highlight them more on my resume specifically for this employer, to show them, that they can see and highlight those transferable skills. I think that goes a long way too. And it just shows, that you're going the extra mile to basically go ahead and spruce up your resume. And there's so many different sites out there to, there's templates, et cetera, that help do that. But I would say, like, and then even going through that exercise, finding out, hey, maybe I'm not the strongest right now in this particular skill set, like Python or something. And so maybe I can jump on, one of these, like a Udemy or Udacity or something like that. There's plenty of edX classes for free out there. The Udemy classes for Python are super cheap, and just refresh and sharpen the skills so that you do stand out.
Yeah.
Brian, are you reading?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Sorry, go. I was teasing. I was like, are you reading the questions? Because you really teed that up well for a question that I was going to get into. But Emily, before we go there,
absolutely.
What were you?
Yeah, I was just going to say +1 to everything Brian said. Being pointed when you reach out to a recruiter is really important. I'd also say, like, if you can email them instead of sending them a LinkedIn request, hitting their inbox is a lot more valuable. And it's not hard to figure out someone's email. Like, go to Google and type in Vanguard email format or Seer Interactive email format, and it'll say like first initial, last name at Seer Interactive or whatever, and you can email that person directly. And that goes a little further too. I'm like, oh, they know how to do some research to find my email. So again, even that is just a little trigger for me. And then also like read that person's background. Like lots of times as recruiters, we have a lot of color on our LinkedIns, or we're sharing content, or typically there's something you can glean from that to be able to say like, call out something like, I say in my LinkedIn, like I love filling my studio apartment with plants and like trying to be the best cat mom I can be, and being able to say like, oh, I hope you're holding up well, and like your studio apartment, I don't know, that might be a little creepy actually, maybe I wouldn't go there. But you get the idea. You can like reference things from the profile to try to be a bit more personalized, and like humor, empathy, catching that person's attention. Like those are all the things that you're looking for. There is something else that Brian shared that was great, and I wanted to piggyback off as well. But I think he really hit the nail on the head there.
Emily, I think that you are a great cat mom. The green thumb.
Thank you.
Brian, you had mentioned this is a good time to like develop more skill sets. There's a lot of online sources. This is a question I personally have always had too, which is like what types of training would you actually recommend? What actually counts? Because there's that difference between on-the-job experience and taking, whether it's MOOCs. I had a specific question around boot camps, how those are viewed by recruiters. So if you could just give some guidance on yes and no's, or yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, boot camps, depending on like what your background already is, they're great. I know that at Vanguard we work with a particular boot camp up in New York, and we've had great success. We built out several large teams using that particular group. So that is something that, if you're just getting into the data and analytics space, maybe you graduated already and you didn't have a particular degree in, computer science or, anything in that field, and you wanted to brush up and sharpen up, and, boot camps are great. I think we view them as, obviously you're doing the extra work, you're going out of your way to learn and get into the space. And so, it goes a long way for sure. And we hire plenty of people from boot camps. I think, the other thing I'd say is, there's like looking at jobs, if you already have that background, if you already have a degree, in this type of space, and you're just trying to brush up on certain things that are really, job specific, software changes every day. Certain skills you might see in a resume or in a job description that of a company that you're looking to work at, that you say, oh, I have everything else, but I don't have that one thing. Jump online and you can easily do a class and brush up on that. So I think especially being from home is a great time now to be able to do this as well. Whereas, if you're working a full-time job and, you're trying to take classes after work, etc., it's really hard. Where now it's, you could carve out time during the day to take those classes. And then, just basically brushing up on your own background and knowing what you have to offer is a big thing. Looking in the mirror and just saying like, here's all the things that I've done. Here's everything that I bring to the table. How can I highlight them? I think that really goes a long way too. I think I just ended
Emily,
that and we got a ping here. Sorry about that.
Yeah. I was going to share similarly, like boot camps are great. You're learning skills. Like there's so much more there though. And when Brian spoke to like thinking about what you bring to a role, like a boot camp alone isn't going to get you a job. Just like 1 year of experience at a company applying those skills might not always get you the job you want. It's all about the story that you tell and how you can shape that story to the organization that you're applying for. So like, yes, learning hard skills, awesome. I'd say also there's tons of resources out there to like self-educate. So if you don't have the money for a boot camp, or if you're thinking like, I saw a question here about like, hey, do I join a boot camp where there's a guarantee or like stay on unemployment? Your call, but I think it also depends on like the amount of discipline that you have, and not a knock at all, either way, but like self-education can be hard, especially when like we're in the middle of a pandemic and things are weird. Like it might be helpful to have that structure to make sure that you're actually working towards those goals rather than having to create that framework for yourself. But I think, again, even more importantly is like, what do you have to share and how do you tell that story, and getting comfortable with really soft skills too. Like soft skills are so valuable. They're even more valuable than the hard skills a lot of the time. Like being able to talk to people and articulate value is huge. And that starts with being able to articulate your value, especially in a job search. So spending some time just brainstorming, like even when I started my job search, I was like, okay, I'm going to get out my notebook. I'm going to make a list of all of the things I'm really proud of that I've done over the past few years. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are the things that I'm learning right now? What are the tools I have experience with? And then also tying really specific examples to those too. So I'm not like, I'm good at these 3 things that I think I'm good at, but I don't have like a story or like an example or a point of reference to really kind of showcase that in action. So that's really important as well, whether you do a boot camp or not. So yeah.
That's great. I personally have, I'll quickly add this and then Brian, please jump in. I personally have definitely experienced having like being trumped by someone with more experience when you're trying your best to do the trainings and self-teach a lot of these skills. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on whether it's tempering your expectations. It's like, how do you get similar kind of experience when you know you're just going up against someone who has just actually been in that role for longer?
I'll chime in here and then bounce it to Brian. It makes sense. There's always going to be someone out there with more experience than you. So like whether we're in a pandemic or not, like you always have fierce competition. So certainly that competition is a bit more fierce right now, but again, I'd say it goes back to you and what is the value you bring and how do you articulate that. I'd say also like compensation could play a big part in that as well. Like my partner is looking for software engineering jobs right now, and he's in the same position a lot of you are. And part of my hope for him is like, hey, you're fresh, you're just out of college, like you're not looking for the same salary as someone who has 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years of experience as you. And that may not be everyone on this call, but again, I think it comes back to like knowing what is the value that you bring and being able to articulate that, and networking and being able to get yourself in front of people is really important. You're going to be the first person that they think of if you're able to make a connection when a job arises or if they hear of a role that popped up. So those are a couple ways to stand out. And I think, again, it's like quality over quantity. It's personalization. It's taking time to understand like what value do you bring and what value do you bring to that organization specifically, and then practicing articulating that. But Brian, I'll let you pop in. I know you had something additional as well.
I think that's all great. I mean, that is absolutely what you have to do. And like the only thing I could add to that, honestly, is just, and you said it already, but it's like your own soft skills. Like you're just making sure that, you know, you have the gratitude. You're not, you know, even if you're not that, like you mentioned, Emily, there's competition out there. That's what, you know, that may be above where you're at skill set wise. But if say that person is, that the attitude isn't there, right? They're not a team player, etc. And you came in and you're proving that you are a team player, you're learning, you're educating yourself, trying to get to that person, to where they're at in their, in their background and their experience. I think that goes a long way, and you may be considered. It's just depending on, obviously what the needs are of the company at the time. So I think, just making sure to have that, just be humble, etc. I think goes a long way in most companies. So that's all I was going to add. The only other thing I was going to add was about podcasts. Like podcasts for me, if anytime like I'm learning a new tool or I'm learning, just anything about a particular, even in recruiting, like when I first started in data and analytics, I would listen to data and analytics podcasts so I could start to understand, the lingo, etc. I think podcasts are a great way. They're free, obviously, but they're a great way to spark, just certain things that you might have, it's almost like brainstorming with yourself. You listen to a podcast and all of a sudden you start to think of all these different things. And there's great ones out there, especially for this, particular job searching, etc. So if anybody is interested, I can share a few afterwards that I think are really good to check out.
We do have a question about specific podcast recommendations, so maybe we could like add those to the chat at the end. Want to make sure, given the time, that hitting on. I had a question come in earlier about like allowable gaps in employment, just like how understanding recruiters are, especially if it's during a crisis.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that as far as, the gaps in employment, especially during a pandemic, should be taken into consideration, right? I think there's, without a doubt, companies have laid off. I've been around now for about 15 years. I joined a company in 2008 during the recession. So have seen this before, have seen, folks that have, gone through the interview process. They might have been out of work for a year, if not more, because of the recession. It's something that obviously we take into consideration, and I don't think it would, hurt a candidate's candidacy to have that during this time. I mean, if a company wasn't understanding of that too, you might not want to work at that company either. That's just my suggestion.
Yeah. And just piggybacking off of that, again, like, it's your story. What is your story and how do you share that story? And I think being able to express also, like, yeah, like I was being like diligent with my career search and thoughtful, and like didn't just want to jump into any opportunity. Like we said, quality over quantity. Like I was really researching and figuring out what organizations I wanted to be a part of, and exploring job descriptions and what skills that I should be working on, and focusing there, and focusing on where I knew I was going to be able to really add value, versus just trying to jump into any job on the market, while also being able to be vulnerable and say like, oh yeah, and by the way, like it's been a really tough job market. Like not a lot of jobs posted. People understand. And just like Brian said, like if people don't understand, probably not the place you want to be.
Yeah, also a great point.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, I also remember someone asked in here about like, is it an expectation that you should be learning skills right now or taking online courses? And no, I mean, like certainly like everyone is experiencing some warped version of like their world right now. So if you are like, I think the person said like, I have kids at home, like I don't have daycare, like I'm now like a full-time mom again. So yeah, I don't think that like if you don't come out of this with like 10 different certifications to show for, 5 different online courses you took, like that's okay. Like I don't think that any of us should be putting that sort of pressure on themselves. Like
Agreed. Some
days I have great days and I read and I learn, and some days I have horrible days and I'm like, there's no way I'm going near that textbook. And and those days stretch into, they compound. Like sometimes it's not one bad day, it's 3 or 4 of the week. So like be patient with yourself. Don't add added pressure, feeling like you need to like move the world right now. It's not worth it. And it's just going to be, you're just making things more difficult for yourself. So try to be patient, and gentle.
Emily, does that go back into like the story that you tell and how you story? Because I do agree that, I mean, I personally feel the pressure of like coming out of this with some sort of like an entire Udacity course completed, of having the extra time and also being somewhat new to the analytics industry. And I do think it's like, it's sometimes not that black and white. So how do you sort of account for what you were able to accomplish during this time, or just what you are working on given constraints in your personal life?
Yeah, it's 100% your story. I think that like being able to say up, and everyone's experiencing this, right? Like I just said that and you're like, hey, I feel that. And I'm sure whoever asked the question feels it, and lots of other people. But being able to say like, if they ask like, so what have you been doing to like brush up on your skills while you've been like in between roles? Being like, well, to be honest, like when I first got laid off, or when I first started my search, like I thought I was going to get certified in X and Y and Z. And like, I was planning to read these 5 books, and I was going to like wake up early and go for a run. And I would like listen to my podcast while I was in the shower. And just like, we all had these dream versions of like what our life was going to be now that we're like remote and we're not commuting and we have extra time, and like, oh, starting my job, like I'm gonna have so much time to like get all these skills and qualify for all the roles I want. So I think being able to paint that rosy picture and then totally flip it upside down and be like, and then like real life happened, and I have my kids at home, and like I'm like, some days are great days and some days aren't, and like of all of the things I thought I was going to accomplish, that looks so much different right now. And like I did maybe 5% of the things I thought I was going to do, but here's what I'm really proud of, and here's what I learned, and here's kind of how I've shifted my approach from when all of this started to now, and how I'm focusing on like making sure that I'm okay and prioritizing that, and then really kind of looking at, all right, where do I want to be and how do I get there? And these are the couple of things that I've identified that I'm really focused on, instead of trying to like move the world. And I guarantee whoever is on the other end of that line is going to be like, yep, I hear you. Like, that was me. I probably only did 5% as well. So again, I think it's being comfortable, being vulnerable, and like letting your guard down a little bit, and also getting comfortable, like piecing together what that dialogue looks like for you. Cause it's going to be different for everyone. And yeah, that's what I got.
That's awesome. Brian, feel free to add to that. I was going to, just given time, ask you a specific question that I've seen come in around just how you think about definitely the percentage of bullet points. Yeah.
I would just say, just to add, the only thing I would add to what Emily said is that, again, like she mentioned being vulnerable. I think that goes a long way if you can share that. Everybody has different home life situations going on, but the one thing that we all have in common is obviously we're going through a pandemic together. So again, you know, if you express like your, you know, shine a little light into what you're doing at home and what, you know, you've done and were able to do, and then maybe even shine some light on the things that you were not able to do because of all these, you know, the pressure, et cetera. It goes a long way. And employers love that. I mean, at the end of the day, I can't tell you how many times I talk to a candidate, and when we get into, you know, not necessarily personal conversation, but having some of that come through, it goes a long way for sure. And that's all I would add to that.
No, thank you. I think I really needed to hear that just around vulnerability, because sometimes you're really trying to sell this like ideal image of yourself.
Definitely.
I just want to make sure that we get to question around like position, what percentage of required experience do you really need to match to even be considered?
That's a great question. I mean, for the roles in Vanguard, I think it just depends on the role. If you're talking about analyst, you know, if you're applying to like a senior level advanced analytics analyst and you have, you know, 0 to a year experience, it's going to be a challenge, right? I think that, you know, there's so many different backgrounds in the space. I think for the majority of our roles, if you have, you know, if you're coming out of school and you have some experience, you know, in that space, you could be considered for more of like the entry level, data scientist, machine learning engineer, advanced analytics analyst, etc. But like to get more towards that mid-year, I've seen folks even like 2 to 5 years, you know, get into that more mid to senior level type of role. So yeah, the space is so new, honestly, and you will see like Vanguard, like I mentioned, we'd say we're even 5 years behind in this space. The space is so new that even colleges didn't have this type of like these programs 4 years ago, right? So like this is all new. So anybody that has 2, 3, 4 years experience, I already consider them like mid-level. You know what I mean at this point. So yeah, it just depends on the company, really. It's a great question, and I know that comes up a lot, but it really depends on the company and what they're comfortable with.
Emily, feel free to add to that. I had a question earlier that I want to make sure I get to, which was the audience was specifically wondering about Hadoop, but broadly just like what are the most important skills or domains that you see like frequently across different roles that are required? What are those sort of top 5 or 10?
Yeah, I honestly, it depends. It really depends on the role and the type of position you're applying for. So as Brian mentioned earlier, like looking at the jobs that you want and trying to find commonalities between skills that they're looking for, and then focusing your attention there would be my biggest suggestion, because every company is working with a different tech stack. There isn't necessarily like a universal tech stack that data analysts should know. I know that like SQL and Python are 2 pretty big skills for data analysts, but again, like some organizations that might actually be Java it depends. So I'd say like looking at those job descriptions, and also I think this connects well to the last question in terms of like bullet points. Don't think about the number of bullet points that need to match. Think about like the contents within those bullet points. And one thing that Brian mentioned earlier, again, is like researching those job descriptions and trying to showcase your experience through the lens of that role. One way that you can do that might be helpful is like using a word cloud. So putting a job description in a word cloud in one window, putting your resume in a word cloud in another window. And what are the biggest words that show up? What are the words that show up at all? And like, do they match? Do they complement each other? If your resume's word cloud looks nothing like that job description's word cloud, you might want to make some tweaks to see if you can showcase your experience through the lens of that role, because subconsciously that's what we're seeing too. Like those are like, that is representative of those trends. So little trick. But yeah, I'd say like do research on the jobs you want and then focus on those skills versus what are like the top 3 skills that every data analyst should know.
Definitely.
Brian, if you have anything to add to that, feel free. I'm going to get in one last question before we wrap it up. And I'm going to specifically start with you just because I think it's more of a larger corporation question around sponsorship and like how to, Emily, of course, feel free to opine.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that last question would be like to Emily's point, like it's, you know, these technologies change every day. And in Vanguard, we have so many different divisions. that, Hadoop might be a major thing that we need in CAI, or CAI is, even at this point has moved on from that particular skill set. So, there's all these different skill sets that we're constantly upgrading. So I would just find out, and that's a great question for the recruiter. If you have a screen, like, hey, what are you using? What do I need to be prepared for? Let the recruiter, give you some insight to that particular role as well. And that'll go a long way to help you prepare for the interview. So because you may have these things, you just might not have it highlighted, and it's good to, again, you might talk to the recruiter and say, actually, this job isn't even for me. This is completely, below or above to where I need to be. And then, again, you can take action to where you need to go. As far as the sponsorship question, I will try to answer to the best of my ability. It's been a big topic, so I'm a little fresh on it. I think I can answer any sponsorship questions. We'll see.
Yeah, the question was just like around, I believe, advice for someone who is looking for sponsorship. So different ways of approaching job search if they're in that situation.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I would first look on job descriptions. A lot of times job descriptions will say if a company does not sponsor or they do sponsor, but sometimes they forget to take that off of a job description. So I would, again, ask the recruiter, the first thing you want to talk about, does this job sponsor? I know it's not the most comfortable conversation to have, but you never want to get into a position where you go through an entire process and at the very end they want to make you an offer and it's like, oh, wait, hold on, I didn't know you needed sponsorship. There's situations that occur like that all the time. I think at Vanguard, we're really lucky in the data and analytics space. We sponsor in every department. So I have never had an issue, with that particular type of situation happening. But I think it's good to know what type of sponsorship on the front end a person needs. You know how it is. There's so many different types of visas, et cetera. You could, be capped exempt. Unfortunately for Vanguard, that is something that it is a challenge to, sponsor somebody that has that type of visa. So there's just to have that dialogue on the front end goes really far. But like in specifically searching, if you need sponsorship, that's the number one thing I would do is just make sure you can do your research online. You can ask your network, does that company sponsor first, and target the companies that do. And most companies, Fortune 500 companies will sponsor at the end of the day. So hope that helps.
Yeah. I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank you guys so much for hanging out for an extra 8 minutes, and everyone who was part of the audience for being really engaging and asking great questions. I know I definitely learned a couple of things, tips and tricks for.
I just have one last question. I know we had this question asked beforehand, so I want to make sure it's answered. The question was around people with disabilities and how they should approach recruiting. If there are any resources that this panel can discuss, I will write that in the chat box. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I believe that Brian mentioned a couple resources at the start, but was speaking to kind of slipped his mind and need to share afterwards. To be honest, I don't know of any like organizations off the top of my head that you would tap for like interview advice or job search advice. I think, again, researching and trying to figure out, like, first, I think it's going to be unique to what your disability is. And then doing a bit of research around that will be helpful to identify organizations. It's a bit challenging to speak to that just because there's such a wide range of disabilities and how that may or may not impact the role you're applying for. I think in one situation I was in once before as a recruiter, I had reached out to someone for an analytics role, and the girl replied to my email, was very interested in chatting, and we got on the phone together, and she had a speech impairment, and I of course didn't know that through our email, it wouldn't have come through. But immediately in getting on the call together, she said like, hey, I just want to let you know before we get too far into our conversation, I do have a speech impairment. So if you need me to repeat something, please let me know, but it might take me a bit longer to answer your questions. And that was super helpful. Like, I love that because how would I have known otherwise? And it really helped me better understand and better communicate with her. And it helped me speak a bit slower and listen a bit closer. So in that instance, that was really, really beneficial for me being on the other side. I don't know how much that stretches across different sorts of disabilities. I don't think that is totally necessary for you to like disclose at the start of an interview or in your application or anything like that you have a disability. But in that instance, knowing that we weren't face to face and how would I have known that otherwise, it was super helpful. And it allowed us to have a more engaging conversation together.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback off that, I think, I guess the agency that I was thinking of earlier in the beginning when we first mentioned this is ODEP. They're the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and they have great resources on that particular site. And so they will help obviously across, all disabilities 100%, and there's tools and things of that nature to use, but just information really when you're out looking for jobs and how to approach, etc. Just good advice. So that is the ODEP, Office of Disability Employment Policy, and you could check that out, and there's different links for certain disabilities, etc. Within that site. And then if I think of anything else, I texted a few recruiters too at the beginning of the call to see if I could get my memory refreshed here to see if there was anything. My days at Campbell Soup Company, we went through a brief training for this, but there wasn't one particular like company to use or go through, but I know that the ODEP was a big one that we use for resources.
Brian, sorry about that. No, that's thank you for that. And Rajvi also typed it in chat. If anything comes up after the webinar, we'll make sure to post it for those who have registered on Meetup. We'll communicate it through that. But we are now 13 minutes over. I want to thank you guys again for that extra time and just joining us today. I hope everyone found this useful and looking forward to future events with all of you.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, everyone. This was fantastic. Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.